now going to move to our final panel of the day, and we're really excited to have with us. We heard earlier, as we heard from legislators, the important role of the state legislature since its launch. Since the launch of the Master Plan for Aging, the Newsom administration and the legislature have invested $9 billion in unprecedented investments to advance the MPA. These can be broad investments or very tailored and targeted investments. Some were one-time, some are ongoing, to strengthen existing programs and launch new services. In our closing panel, we're thrilled we get to hear from key legislative staff who have been engaged all along the way and in the future will be right there beside us to elevate the key issues of our priority population. So I'd like to invite, please, to come to the stage, Mayriva Brown, Heather Hopkins, Elizabeth Fuller, Jawan Trotter, and Nicole Vasquez, and our moderator, Kim Rutledge.
I'm going on this side. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kim Rutledge. I'm from the Department of Rehabilitation, and I have the privilege this afternoon of moderating this panel with 5 individuals who many of you may not know by name unless you spend a lot of time at the legislature, but these folks are really the people who get things done. These are the behind-the-scenes folks who are really moving forward our policy and budget change that we've been talking about all day long up to this point. So we're just going to dive right in because I also have the privilege of moderating the largest panel of the day. So I hope everybody talks fast, but not too fast. And we're going to have a little discussion about the legislature and the outlook for the next year and what we can continue to do to advance the Master Plan for Aging. So just to dive right into the questions here, we'll start with Mayriva Brown. Mayriva works for Senate Pro Tem McGuire, who we heard from earlier this morning. So Mayriva, as principal consultant to Pro Tem McGuire, you play a critical role in elevating the most pressing issues to Senate leadership. How has the Senate engaged in the Master Plan for Aging, and what priorities has the legislature moved forward in recent years? What are key issues that you expect to see raised in the coming session to address the needs of older adults, people with disabilities, and caregivers?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
First of all, thank you for inviting me to this multi-birthday party. It is exciting to be here and exciting to see where we are at this point in time. The Department of Aging has provided some incredible structure for both this event, but also for the master plan, and really given advocates an opportunity to come together and prioritize and speak with one voice, which is tremendously important for legislators trying to figure out which direction to go. You know, before the master plan, there were a lot of conversations about different things that needed to be done, and those conversations were helpful, but they were kind of siloed. We need to make sure that CBAS gets addressed in this way. We need to make sure we talk about long-term services and supports differently. And through your convenings and your work together, you are really speaking with one voice, and that is tremendously helpful for legislators trying to understand what to do and where to go now. So as you heard my boss, Senator McGuire, say earlier today, there is broad recognition among legislators that we need to continue to focus and double down on issues for our aging and disability populations. And as many of you are probably aware, there have been a number of different senators who've really engaged in this over the past few years and previously. I mean, we've had different members who really understand this issue, often because of a personal connection. I will say that this is a really unique topic in that people, senators and assembly members who may have other priority issues that they work on, come to this table because of a personal experience. We've had different members this year who've come in with bills on long-term care services and supports or licensing issues or other issues because of a personal experience. And that is an opportunity for you all to connect with people about this issue kind of beyond the scope of people who say they want to work on aging issues. This year, both houses will have approximately 25% new members. So coming in the door, you have a lot of folks who are trying to figure out what they want to focus on and trying to figure out how the process works. And this is an opportunity for you. Get to know the members, get to know the candidates now, get to know the members in the district, invite them to visit the programs in the communities where they live. It is tremendously powerful for members to come back from the district and say, I had a conversation with a senior at a center who said this. That is what gets bills moving, is somebody who can make a very real connection. So as you have heard throughout the day, the pandemic really provided a spotlight on different issues that, I think were discussed before, but it really brought home the urgency for we need to fix some of these gaps and we really need to protect some of our aging and disability populations that are particularly vulnerable. And the legislature answered. In the past few years, we have substantially increased the SSI grant, helped isolated seniors become tech savvy and tech equipped, shored up the CBAS program. Do I get a hoot for that one? Expanded senior nutrition programs, and also it is kind of a moving target for how to deliver senior nutrition during and post-pandemic. Increased the baseline funding for AAAs, established IHSS training programs, and training programs for folks who do direct service in other areas for disabilities. I mean, the training is something that has been sorely needed and has been addressed recently. Expanding ADRCs. I'm remembering the panelist who was talking earlier about just some sort of information for where we go and where we start. And the ADRCs have expanded significantly, and the legislature has really, been invested in expanding the ADRCs so that there is a no wrong door system for folks. Expanding the scope of adult protective services, creating the Home Safe program, which I think almost everyone has talked about, providing operating subsidies for assisted living facilities who have high populations of individuals with SSI benefit, and also just other recognition that we need to increase the options for folks who are, if not low income, close to that in the forgotten middle, and need housing options that they can afford. And many, many other innovations. So for the key issues you asked about that are likely to be raised in the coming year, I think they've been discussed here in many ways, and my boss talked about them: the homelessness, the increase in homelessness, first-time homelessness numbers for folks who are older is horrifying. It's something that people need to focus on. People are trying to focus on it, but it is definitely a priority and something that is recognized among the legislative members. Like they talk about it quite a bit. Transportation, home and community-based services, and especially the forgotten middle. I was taking notes during the last recommendations. Continuing to expand the No Wrong Door, that will come as no surprise to the Department of Aging. But really what I want to say is that I think the answer to the legislative priorities lies with you. You need to help the members understand and prioritize what the most important issues are. We are in a fiscal situation that isn't, as great as it was a few years ago. And so navigating, like, what can we do without spending a lot of money? What things did we create during the pandemic that were done with one-time dollars that we need to save? I think there is a great need for your information and your guidance. And I am looking forward to seeing what we all do together next year.
Thank you for that, Mariva. I don't think I realized that almost a quarter of the legislature will be brand new next year. That's significant and definitely an opportunity for all of us to make sure our priorities are moving forward. So now I'm going to move on to the next question, and that one is for Heather. So Heather, as staff director for the Senate Human Services Committee, you are responsible for jurisdiction of legislative bills that pertain to critical programs and services in the community that older adults and people with disabilities rely on to remain at home and out of institutions. Based on your legislative experience, what do you see as the most pressing issues and opportunities that the state should consider for the Master Plan for Aging?
Thank you so much. Is this working? Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I think building on what Mariva said, that there really is a huge opportunity with the new members coming in. With the Senate, there are 10 members who have termed out, so 10 new members coming in, potentially 4 of those coming up from the Assembly, but they're all going to need bill ideas, and they're going to need them quickly because, especially with the newer members who aren't coming from the Assembly, they're going to be sworn in and staffing up and needing bills before the deadline to introduce. So that really gives you all an opportunity to take what are your priorities, what would you like to see in legislation, to take those ideas you have from the stakeholder advisory committees that are cooked bills that have built-in sponsors and coalitions of support, and you can present those especially to these new members, because the Senate doesn't really at this time have a champion for these issues, but it's a real opportunity for you to create one by reaching out to these members, the new members, their staff, and presenting, hey, we have these bills for you. They have been vetted. We have a coalition of support. We can help you get this over the finish line. And I think in that way, you can create momentum through what is important to you and get that moved through the Senate.
All right. Thank you. All right, Liz, you're up next. So as the chief consultant for the Assembly Committee on Aging and Long-Term Care, you play a key part in developing a legislative agenda with Chair Baines and the committee members related to the needs of older adults, people with disabilities, and family caregivers. Legislative leadership is key. How can stakeholders and the state continue to build legislative leaders who are committed to these issues? This seems like a very salient question, given that we're going to have new people to build from.
So I would start by saying, let's elect leaders from this space. And that starts with all of you. People, you don't know what you don't know. So you can't expect a legislator that's already in the pipeline to understand the importance of this issue. But almost all of you really work exclusively in a home base. And it's important as people are coming to the legislature younger and younger. And so they really don't necessarily think this is going to be their wheelhouse. But I think that as you start to go out and interact with people who are interested in being elected officials, be that broken record that's constantly asking them what they anticipate to do in elected office in the aging space. And I think what you'll find is that eventually you're going to show up to spaces and that elected official will think, person, I don't want to have to answer their question again, and they will start to incorporate it into the things that matter to them in all of their talking points. And then it actually does start to resonate. They realize this is an important policy space to be in. But I think that if you can tailor everything to an elected official, so as we have in both houses, and while I work in the assembly, I also have to analyze Senate bills. So it is in my interest that you are working with the Senate side as well to help educate them and make sure that they are engaged in the aging space, because when that bill comes over to the assembly side, we want engaged legislators working in this policy space as well. And so I think that it's important that we start to look at the people who are coming in. What do they say is important to them? If they say the economy is important, they may not think that the aging policy space is one for them. I have something called paid family leave that I've worked on a lot in the past. And if you want to build a robust workforce, you start to put systems in place so we can all be whole people inside and outside of our jobs, and that builds a strong economy. But I think that we have to find, it's on us as advocates, and I consider myself an advocate as well, that we need to find the way to make this important. And it shouldn't be that that legislator naturally has to say, there are 22 policy committees in the assembly. They can't all say all 22 are. But it's on us to find a way to say that the aging and disability space can really finesse in all of these other spaces. So if someone says, transportation is my #1 issue, everybody should channel their inner Debbie Toth and go into every meeting and talk to them about how it is so important that you ensure that all of your transportation programs are accessible and user-friendly to populations across the board. I also would like to say that how do we help build those natural leaders is to work with staff. Everyone up here is not someone that I just consider a colleague, but they are my friends. Jawan had only met me in Zoom, but I barricaded the bottom of the escalator this morning, and he had to become my friend. So now he's friend. Sorry. But I do think that as legislative staff, it's really amazing to hear about what you're working on now. It's hard sometimes to know that I'm engaged with all of you. You all know how to reach me, but I hear about your bills after they're introduced. It's hard sometimes to then find maybe I could have encouraged you to find a different author, or that's also really well linked with another bill in the other house, and finding some of those natural partnerships early helps strengthen your bills. So I encourage the way to build natural leadership isn't just with one member. It's kind of seeing the legislature as a whole, seeing the pipeline that elects those legislators and how in 2 years we'll be entering another election, but also using all of us as staff as a way to help you navigate the bill process, sometimes finding the right author, sometimes helping you get a bill in before a deadline. So I'm always here to help, and this is a space that I love being in, so thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for that, Liz. And now we're going to move on to Jawan, who is the one person I had only met on Zoom until today, too. So welcome. So in your role at the Legislative Analyst's Office, you provide fiscal guidance and to the legislature on human services issues, including aging and disability. How does the LAO approach developing their fiscal outlook for the state budget? Do you see opportunities for the state to advance the key goals of the Master Plan for Aging, regardless of the budget situation?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I'm really grateful to be on this panel and to have been invited to this entire conference. I've been learning a lot and also clearly making a lot of new friends. I just want to start, so in case anyone here doesn't know what the Legislative Analyst's Office does, and no shame in that, we are the nonpartisan fiscal and policy analysts, or advisors to the legislature. So to jump in on that question, our office produces a fiscal outlook every year with the goal of providing the legislature with independent analyses of the budget condition leading into the upcoming budget cycle. And we do that by developing independent estimates of expenditures and revenues based on current law and policy. What that means is that the further out in time we go with these estimates, the more uncertain those assumptions become. And so I like to think of our fiscal outlooks as less of a definitive statement and more as a reflection of our best guidance with the information we have at this time. Now, taking a step back, I don't think it's a surprise to anyone in this room that the state was going through a pretty significant budget problem. And so, for context, a budget problem being when states' resources are not sufficient to cover the estimated costs of authorized services. And so the state constitution requires us to solve these type of budget problems, and there's a couple of ways we can do that. For example, we could raise revenues or decrease costs. And the legislature and the administration did pass some budget actions during the past budget window to address this budget problem. However, because budgets are based on estimates of revenues and expenditures that are constantly being updated and changed, it's not a surprise that we're going to need to come back to this budget come the beginning of the budget cycle starting in January. With that being said, our office is in the midst of developing our fiscal outlook for this year, for the upcoming years. And in August, we released some revenue estimates that showed that revenues were on track, or estimated to be on track, with what was assumed during the passage of the last budget. And so, yeah, what was assumed to be on track with the last budget. And so, this is a good sign. However, while anything is possible, I wouldn't say that says that we're going to have a budget surplus going forward. And I say that because last year there were some assumptions made, and one of the assumptions made during the last budget process was that in the coming year we were going to have to utilize around $7 billion in reserves. And what this means is that in order for there to be a budget surplus, not only would revenues need to meet our expectations, but they would actually need to go beyond our expectations. And given the data we have and the numbers we have right now at our disposal, that's just not something we're necessarily seeing. Now, that was a lot on the budget, so thanks for sticking with me on that, given the end of the day. But what does that mean for the master plan of aging, right? So I think the good news is that the master plan of aging is inherently a pretty long-term program and project with a lot of different initiatives in different stages of development. And so I think we have a good opportunity to continue to advance the goals of the MPA regardless of where the budget kind of falls in the coming year. For example, as we've heard today, and as we heard up here and from different stakeholders, there's been a lot of initiatives that have been going on for quite a while now, for a couple of years. And I think it's a good time now to take a step back and reflect, and one, see if those initiatives are achieving the goals we want them to achieve. And we've heard today that a lot of them are. And with those, I think it's good to maybe try to take some of the best practices we're seeing in those initiatives and see if ways that we can apply them to the initiatives that yet to have come up or that are still coming, in ways that we kind of integrate some of the recommendations that we've heard a lot of our other panels and other speakers have been bringing up. And so I think as long as we continue to plan, continue to do research, continue to utilize some of the data that's coming in on these programs and initiatives that have been going on for a while, I think regardless of where the budget ends up, I think we're in a good place to continue a lot of the momentum that we've gained in the last couple of years as we go into the next stage of the MPA.
Thank you for that, Juwan. I know the state budget process can be mystifying to many people until they live it and breathe it. And my last question is for someone who has lived and breathed state budget for a long time, 18 years in February. Nicole Vasquez. So Nicole, as Deputy Chief Consultant to the Assembly Budget Committee, you have tremendous influence on how the legislature prioritizes and advances issues impacting older adults, people with disabilities, and caregivers. You have seen the issues evolve for 18 years in February, including through tough fiscal times. What do you see as the most important elements to advance change, even in tight fiscal times? And how can stakeholders successfully elevate these issues impacting this population so these priorities are front and center?
Thank you so much, Kim. I so appreciate being invited to be here. It's really an honor to be among so many distinguished colleagues, people who inspire me all the time, and being on this team seated here. These are the folks I work with all the time, and in the village of the Master Plan for Aging in the legislative neighborhood. It's wonderful to be with these folks who really just give me the ability to do what can be a really difficult job, and was this year in particular. So I'll say I have the distinction of being the last speaker on the last panel, wink, wink. But I also have the distinction of serving amazing bosses, one of whom you heard from today, Dr. Corey Jackson. And he's all in, and I'm all in. And you can see the kind of leadership that I work under. Him, Assemblymember Jesse Gabriel, the budget chair, Speaker Rivas. I get to work in an amazing house that I love, with an amazing set of members and amazing staff to work on human services issues, the passion of my life. And I love what Catherine Blakemore said, and I'd have to say this is in honor of my mother, Helen Vasquez, who passed away 3 years ago, and many of the lessons that I bring into the work that I do does come from my family. She was the youngest of 10 children. And so as her youngest daughter, my sister passed away several years ago, I got to see and experience the movement into the golden years of my aunts and uncles and their eventual passing. So I feel like I've had the experience to some degree of the continuum, and with a lot of folks' help in this room, was connected to services. Thank you, the PACE program. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Love you guys. You're amazing. And all the other programs that I've been able to work with over the years, MSSP, CBAS, IHSS, APS. Love you guys. Love everyone who works at the county level who works on these issues and with these programs. As my colleagues have said, I feel like they've covered some amazing points that I was thinking about covering. They did it more articulately than I will, but I love that the master plan has integrated so much, this is Mariva's point, integrated so much under really a common umbrella. And what's tough in budget is because you have a budget that's introduced by the administration, by the governor on January 10th, the legislature is reviewing that. It's a critical eye that we're applying to it. We make changes starting in our as we go through our spring hearing process. In the spring, we make changes in May and June, and then we come up with, this is what's happened the last several years, a unified legislative budget, and then we go into a negotiation with the governor. So it's inherently an adversarial relationship between the legislature and the governor to some degree as we work through and try to get through a three-way deal. In the master plan, you have an umbrella that's fostered progress and action and thought across the jurisdiction, across the branches, which is really special, that you have a very unique place. And now the Master Plan for Developmental Services is embarking on the same kind of work. So you have a place to really fight for what you want to achieve for older Californians and people with disabilities. This is the time to fight. This is the message that I want to give. This is the time for you to really stand up for what you want to see. All these recommendations that we've been listening to that are so well put together, to decide what are you going to prioritize and elevate for the administration so that you can maybe be a part of the January 10 proposal. And if not there, then you're coming to both the administration, the governor, and the legislature to try and get your recommendation included in the Budget Act, if you decide that that's your vehicle. You could also choose a bill, as my colleagues have stated. We are happy to work with you, especially in the fall, as Liz invited you to workshop with us, to call us. Part of what I want to do is, for those who don't know me, is to humanize the budget. I work with an amazing team of very accessible, extremely kind colleagues who work on the budget, and they don't wear the green shade of accounting. They are people with a lot of heart and who want to be helpful to stakeholders, to the public, to to representatives from organizations, to advocates. They want to be helpful. So please reach out to me, reach out to us. Let's workshop in the fall. It's a little bit easier to schedule time then before January. It gets harder after then, until the end of June, frankly. So now's a good time to talk about what you want to create in terms of a fighting agenda. As referenced by some of my colleagues, Jawan mentioned this, it may be a tough year ahead. We saw proposals that were cut proposals this past cycle. And as someone who went through the Great Recession and all of the cuts that we adopted during that terrible time, and the decade plus of restorations that we worked for across all the areas that I mentioned, all the programs that I mentioned. Do you remember the across-the-board cuts in IHSS, how awful those were, and trying to get those done away with, right, to the cuts that were done to many of our other programs? It took us many years to get the programs back to a steady state position, and we saw cut proposals this past year. We were able to fend off the worst of them. We took some modifications in budgeting to match the expenditures. So there were some, we call them haircuts, that are not meant to impact people or counties or AAAs or continuums of care, right? We wanted to reduce or eliminate any real human impact. So we did some cutting, but we don't want to do anything that hurts people. Do no harm. So we may have a similar kind of year where we're facing just a steady state kind of protective posture. So you have a difficult role because your role is dual. It is to protect the current environment and everything that you've worked so hard to just get in the system, and then to also fight for the recommendations that are not yet reality, that are ideas to improve and to address real needs that we know are out there. The rising senior hunger, poverty, homelessness. We heard about it. All of us were holding back tears. Everyone in the audience, in our hearings was talking about how terrible the trends are. What are we going to do? This is the challenge that Dr. Jackson and others have presented today. So we have bedrock, good programs, but we need to do more. And we need your work. As invited by other colleagues, we need you to join us and prioritize and make concrete what are the next actionable steps to realize the master plan for aging, because next year we have 5 more years, right, to get the job done. Let's work together. And I heard some things today, the Medi-Cal share of cost. We really heard you on that. Heard about the need for statewide resources when it comes to information referral. My mom worked for information referral for the City of LA Department of Aging, so that really hits home because she talked about the calls that she would get from people who just didn't know where to go. Heard a lot about that today. SSI, SSP grants, we're still not at 100% of federal poverty. We know how dismal federal poverty is. We asked for a graph to be in the Department of Social Services binder at January and May that shows what the grants look like against fair market rent for a studio apartment in each of the 58 counties. In many counties, the full grant does not cover that cost. So that shows you, right, and we asked for it in graphical form. We'll see it in January. The administration agreed to it. Thank you so much. We'll see that graph and we'll see it displayed so people can see the graph. The grant does not cover housing costs. We just need to be, our eyes need to be wide open. So we are fortunate to have the platform of the Master Plan for Aging. I remember sitting on a panel just like this many years ago, and it was just a whisper in the air, we need a master plan. And now here we are, so far into it, all the good work that's being done, all the engines, and the steam, it's there. The attention that you're getting from policymakers is extraordinary, phenomenal. As a person in human services, it does not happen in every program. So this is amazing, the attention that you have from people at the highest level in powerful parts of state government. So we're all part of this village. I'm a member of the village and here to be assistant so that we all can do Tai Chi and have poetry in our lives, right? In our later years, and give back to the community. I want that. We all want that. We all deserve full lives. So thank you so much for inviting me.
Thanks, Nicole. So I think what I've really heard from this panel today is that we're going into a tough budget year, another one. We're going to have a lot of new members that are going to need a lot of education about our issues. So I'm going to pose one final question for whoever wants to jump in and answer it. And that is, how can, we're in a room full of fierce stakeholders, people who their life work, whether it's, internal or external, whether it's on the aging side or the disability side or something, both, people who are just so dedicated to this work. And so to all of us in this room who are going into a tough budget year with new members and uncertainty from the federal level on down, how can stakeholders most effectively communicate these issues and priorities? And how can they prioritize what's the most important, which is so critical during a budget cycle? So how can stakeholders do that even in these tight fiscal times? Liz, I think I see the wheels turning.
I think that probably the best byproduct of the master plan for aging is a natural coalition. And I think that everyone in this room is so incredibly passionate about the program that they represent. And it's difficult sometimes for messaging, because you may have worked in this space for 40 years and you come in and you have an opportunity to meet with a legislator and you would like to give them a 40-year picture of your program. And that can be tough. But this amazing opportunity that the master plan had was that you were all working together in a really collaborative way. And from the human services space, because I wasn't always in aging, if you're not working in a collaborative way, then you're cannibalizing each other. Your program eats another program and is fighting against another program. And I think that as much coalition building as can be done before a bill or a budget ask is even presented to a legislator, it's showing them the strength behind it. And I also can't encourage enough that if you work in nutrition, it doesn't mean that you can't support a housing bill, because you recognize that without one, your program may be at a deficit without supporting the other. So I think that collaboration is key. And that means maybe working with your natural partners, but also really opening the floor to others in the space. I got it. I'm done. Yeah. Okay. Gotcha. Uh-huh. Message received. Collaboration, I think, is key.
Right.
If I could,
I think that was our alarm, but if anybody has something to add.
I was just going to add really quickly. In meeting with members, don't discount the value of meeting with staff as well. I know a lot of folks come in, I was personal staff for about 10 years, and groups would come in and we have a meeting with a member, like actually it's with staff, and you could kind of see on their face, oh, this is not going to be that good. But do not underestimate the value that if you can make your pitch to a staffer and you can get them on the same page as you, that they can work with the member to get them on the same page as well. So staff they have a lot of sway, that they work with the member every day, that if you can get them to understand the importance of these issues, that is so important in getting and reaching your legislative priorities.
Thanks. Nicole?
Just to add on, I think mentioned this a little bit before, but it's the selectivity of what is the maybe, because if you add up all the recommendations, they may be how many? As someone said it, I think earlier, maybe Susan, 18 recommendations. You may want to choose a smaller list, right? And it can be potentially one that's very august, that's going to cost billions of dollars. That's okay to do. A medium-sized priority, and then one that is smaller, and coming to the legislature with a unified front. But that does then mean that you are forsaking 15 other priorities. This is the key issue with almost any broad-based movement like this. is, and I've been talking to some other groups, and they've been asking, what do we do? And I keep saying, select a priority. It's very hard to do, but it is very important because you can't really get through if you've got 18 priorities. It's very tough to do. You can try, but I think especially with the legislature, it's important to try to reduce and elevate the smaller subgroup. So, for what it's worth.
All right. Well, thank you for that. And I think that that's a great point to close on today. Lots of priorities, figuring out how to narrow them down. So thank you all so much for being here, and look forward to working with you all in what will be a very interesting 2025. Great. Thanks.
Thank you, Kim, and our panelists. I am in awe of all of you, and aren't we fortunate in California to work with this dream team here on the stage. Thank you for joining us this afternoon.